Hi, Eugene. I'm gonna try to answer some of the comments that your Sci 500 person left on your video about Workers World Unite. Most of the things you said in your video are right, but I think there's a thing that's a fundamental point that's missing here that needs to be addressed. One of the quotes he left, I didn't read everything he read, but one of the quotes he left said, if people bought and sold at value, then profits would be impossible, since the value the buyer and the seller gets would cancel each other out. Profits come from either the buyer buying the commodities, that includes labor, under their value, or from the seller selling them above their value. That's a pretty clear statement of the fundamental principle he's working on, and I can show that that principle is completely false. First thing to realize is that value is subjective. Something is only valued by someone. The first question to ask about what the value of something is the value to who? And it's only a human being that can value something. Nature doesn't care. The universe doesn't care. It doesn't have a value for anything. It just is. When you talk about value, you're talking about the way some person values this thing. And it's going to be different for every person out there. Classic example of marginal utility, which is what economists call this, is basketballs. If you want to play basketball, you don't have a basketball. A basketball is very, very valuable to you. If you've got 10 basketballs, the 11th one is not very valuable at all. And the market price for basketball will be the same. The value to you, though, will be different. Value is always subjective. Different for every person, different for every circumstance, even different from one time to another for the same person. The beauty of this is that it leads to the one fact that makes capitalism by far the most viable economic system and really renders all of the others unviable, as we've seen in the real world, and there's a theoretical basis for that. The reason is the point that subjective value allows is that whenever there's a voluntary trade, both people end up getting more from the trade than what they gave up. It's not necessary, as Sci 500 says, for either the buyer to buy it at above the value or for the seller to sell it below the value. In both cases, the seller is selling the item for less than what he values it at. The seller is selling the item for more than what he values it at. The buyer is buying the item for less than what he values it at. It's pretty simple to prove this, because the key is that it's a voluntary trade. If you're going to make a voluntary trade, you are not going to give up something that's worth $10 for something that's worth $9. You're not going to trade some amount of value to get something of less value. You just won't do it. The trade will not happen in that case. If it's a voluntary trade, it means it could only happen because both parties are giving up less than what they're getting. You can talk about, and I think Sci 500 does in some cases, you can talk about things like food, shelter, water, things where you will die if you don't have these. Even if we allow that those are the case, that's the case for a very limited, very narrow range of things. Food and water, maybe. I can argue that even in those cases the same principle applies, but I won't bother with that here. It's going to make things go too long. The fact that both people get more than what they gave up means that after the trade has happened, there's now more value in the system than there was before. Not only do each individual person have more value, but the total system has more value. And because of this, you can really say that the production actually happens at the trade. It does not happen when the thing is manufactured. You can look at buggy whips. You can manufacture all the buggy whips you want. You haven't added any value to the system. You've probably decreased the value. Yeah, there's a little bit of a market still for those in the fetish industry, but in terms of real value, real economic value on a broad market, buggy whips are no longer valuable. They once were. You can manufacture millions of them. You're not adding any value to the system until somebody buys one. It's the purchase, the voluntary exchange, that is what creates the actual value in the system, that increases the value for the whole system, increases wealth for both parties individually and for the system as a whole. another result of this is that resources are actually produced. They're not just found in the ground. Raw materials are just raw materials. They're just dirt, rock, whatever. It's only when they start being traded, they're pulled out of the ground by somebody and they're traded. They become resources that are more valuable after the trade than they were while they were sitting in the ground. Resources are not limited to what can be found in the ground. Resources in terms of value that can produce something. Oil is a raw material. Energy is a resource. We can produce energy in many ways. We can find ways to make a given amount of oil give us more energy. We can find energy from other sources. It's technology and trade that allow raw materials to be converted into resources. So you could say that the trade is in the production of value. It happens in the trade, not in the manufacture. And because a requirement for this is that the trade be voluntary for this to happen, you can say that any involuntary trade can be one of two things. It can be a mutually beneficial trade, in which case there's no reason for it to be involuntary. People would have done it anyways. Might not have been the best one, but they still would have done it, or might have done it. In which case, involuntary trade would still produce value, but would produce less value than it would have if people had been allowed to make the trade they prefer. On the other hand, involuntary trade might be a trade that somebody wouldn't have done anyways. If you have to force somebody to make a trade, it's more likely that this is a trade they would not have done. And usually the reason for that is that they gain less than what they give up. And this is what we see in command economies, where people say, you have to buy this, you have to work there, you have to buy this labor for this price. What they're doing is they're saying, you have to make this exchange even though you wouldn't do it voluntarily. And that usually means that it's a zero-sum game or a negative-sum game, in the sense that one person is giving up something, at least one of the parties is giving up something more than what they're getting back. The value in the system reduces in that case. It doesn't increase, or it increases by only a small amount. It doesn't, or it reduces. Let me look here. There was something else he had said. Sci 500 had also commented that free trade assumes each party is independent from each other, within which in an industrial society is false. Independent isn't really the right word. What is true is that people in an industrial society are interdependent. They're independent in the sense of they're individuals, they make their own decisions. But he's right, they do still depend on each other. You can't eat meat. You and I, Eugene, we're not going to eat unless we have farmers. You and I are not going to eat unless there's farmers in the world. We have to trade with them. But it's not involuntary association, because we could, if we wanted to, grow our own food and not associate. We would just lose the opportunity to increase value the way we could if we traded with the farmers instead. Also, we can choose to trade with a wide variety of farmers. We don't have to trade with this one if we don't like him. We can trade with some other one if we like them better. Which grocery store we go to, whatever it is. Markets are a way of managing interdependence while still retaining your individual independence. And that's the key. That's the beauty of what markets do, is they allow you to be independent and still, when you have to be interdependent, still manage that without collectivizing everybody in every context into one collective whole that has to all cooperate, care about each other, look out for each other's interests. You can look out for your own interests in a market. You can be interdependent without taking advantage of the other person. Markets work kind of like evolution. You've got this chaos of individual values, millions and millions of individual values for every possible good and service that's out there. It's total chaos. What markets do, the way evolution does, is they take that chaos, and what arises out of that chaos are the best trades. The trades that are mutually beneficial, the trades that increase value to the system. The system continually builds itself up. Out of this chaos, order emerges, and it works just like evolution.